Hello and welcome, star people. It is 8 p.m. here again with the Outlaw Astrology podcast, and we're going to be talking about aspects as archetypal relationships. And so last week we talked about the outer planets and how they shape consciousness and how they transform us. But today we're going to talk about how planets communicate with each other through aspects. Now, aspects are the cosmic dialogue that shapes our experience, and by that I mean that the planets are wayshowers and the aspects are how they navigate, how they communicate with us so that we can navigate life. So you're looking at the astrological chart as a guide, as a blueprint, rather than a set, fixed narrative. Okay? And so if you like my astro flow, please feel free to like, subscribe, and share this podcast. And if you want to also help and support, we have links in the show notes. Always will be in the show notes, everything I say, where you can support the podcast, where you can listen to the podcast. Will be on any platform of your choosing. However, if you want to do a review, that would be greatly appreciated so others can find us with greater ease. And in particular, if you do it on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, that'd be great, so that we can be seen and heard as much as possible to help other people with the message. And now onward. So we're going to start with a personal story. Now, aspects can be challenging. There are a lot of them and different types. So the type we're talking about are Ptolemaic. That would be conjunction, though technically not an aspect, although we do call it one. Sextiles, squares, trines, oppositions are the ones we're going to be focusing on. Although I will add the quincunx and the semi-sextile because I use those. So aspects are conversations between planetary archetypes, okay? And in and of themselves, they are also archetypes, okay? So we can see them as they're a qualitative distance between harmonious and challenging. That's what's going on. So we're going to be moving beyond good and bad aspects to more purposeful relationships, because good and bad is dual. It is black and white. It is binary. And naturally, there is nothing wrong with things being binary. It's that when we are too black and white focused, we miss the nuance. And by that, I do not mean to imply that I'm a person who sees shades of gray, because technically, almost any animal can see a shade of gray. I mean, I see the rainbow, of which black and white happen to be a part of, although technically black is not a color and white encompasses all the colors. So let's use the metaphor very carefully. So let's step away from the good and the bad aspects. Aspects in and of themselves are not good and bad any more than planets actually tell you what to do or divine a fixed and absolute fate. So aspects create a unique texture for our natal charts and transits. And here is where things get interesting. You might consider these to be part of the nervous system of your chart, because yes, everyone might have their sun in Cancer. That is where the sun is currently at as of the recording. At the time of the recording of this podcast episode, there are a lot of people with sun in Cancer, but not all of those people with sun in Cancer alive today have the same planets in conjunction, in sextile, in square, in trine, in opposition, quincunx, or semi-sextile. That's all going to be what's different. That's why charts are unique. They're like nervous systems. Nervous systems are unique. Now, interesting fact, DNA-wise, human beings are not, there's not as much diversity as we might believe. Genetically, we have a very small, less diverse DNA range within us, even though there's 8 billion people. By contrast, chimpanzees can have a tribe of 55 members, and there'll be more genetic diversity amongst that tribe than amongst 8 billion people. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because our nervous system is what makes us unique. We be in the same circumstances, the same environment, and have radically different interpretations and experiences of that stimuli that we are all experiencing. We can meet the same person, and one person goes, I like that person, and a second person says, and the third person's like, I can't stand them. You can grow up with two other people, or three, or four, or five, in your childhood home, and your experience with each other is going to be unique to you. Okay, just because your brother has a certain experience with the other siblings doesn't mean your experience is going to be the same. Just because you experience your parents this particular way, or parent this particular way, doesn't mean your siblings, if you have them, are going to do the same. And that's what makes us all unique. It's our nervous system that reacts to things or responds to things that makes us unique. And here's why that's important, because aspects in your chart will have that same function. They're going to be unique. Yes, we all have trines in our chart. But the same amount? No. To the same planets? No. To the same points? Absolutely not. So, aspects can create a unique texture in our natal charts and in our transits. And that I find fascinating. So, when we're looking at aspect awareness, I'm going to talk about now how it awakened me. I would say that my relationship with aspects was stumbling and problematic initially, until I started studying more deeply. And what started it was when I started doing Hellenistic and traditional astrology, because that's my starting point. My teacher, who still has a website to this day, was a traditional astrologer using the traditional classical 7 planets, and that's what I learnt from, which is why when I started the podcast, I started with that easy information, at least is my understanding of it, because I feel that's a good basis. If you have a good firm foundation of the classic 7, you can pretty much add any points and planets thereof and still give a good reading. And if you focus your attention on the classical 5 Ptolemaic aspects, then you'll have a pretty good foundation going forward, and you'll be able to add more information to your charts that happens to be interesting and curious. And so my experience was, I was like, what the hell is happening? So I had to find my own words to explain things, and it took me a while to sort out that other people had great ways of explaining things, but what didn't work is that none of those ways of explaining an aspect was my way. So when I look at a conjunction, I see a mind meld. When I look at a sextile, I see an opportunity, a possibility seeker. When I'm looking at a square, I see a troubleshooter, a negotiator. When I'm looking at an opposition, I see a seesaw. I see the push and pull. I see a choice. When I'm looking at a quincunx, which is not Ptolemaic, I'm looking at buttressing and adjustment. So I think of it like the Adjustment Bureau, where you're going to have to make an adjustment because you're going to have to. Although technically the Adjustment Bureau was less about that, but that's a topic for another day. Adjusting, being the adjuster, the fixer, the harmonizer, how to make things run smoothly, that's how I see a quincunx, even though technically it is friction. And a friction that's not easy to find a solution for. And a semi-sextile is a blind spot. I mean, it's nice, but it's not something you're going to know about yourself consciously. It's going to be energy that pretty much you won't see unless circumstances or other people make you aware of it. That's how I see that. So those are how I tend to conceptualize aspects. And it happened over a period of time until I realized I could probably bring my writerly abilities, my ability to tell stories into my astrology, and I didn't find out about that until I found out there are astrologers who call themselves narrative astrologers, meaning that they tell a story with your chart, they world build. I'm finding more people world building, meaning they're borrowing RPG type ideas and bringing it to astrology. And those type of ideas awakened that part of me that likes to invent, to create, so that I could make sense of things on my own. And once I was able to do so, it was easier for me to go, okay, Saturn is having a mind meld with the sun in Aquarius. That means a conjunction, basically. My thoughts are your thoughts. My mind to your mind, my thoughts to your thoughts. That is one of the many ways that Spock on Star Trek, the original series, would begin his mind meld with people when he wanted to get information, which I think is really curious, and that's how I am able to conceptualize a conjunction. Okay, so let's move on to that. The conjunction here, it's called a sacred marriage. I call it the mind meld, but that's another way of seeing it. I like to provide alternative ways of viewing that are not my own, because I feel the tendency to become rigid with my beliefs can be problematic, and I want to mitigate that as much as I can. So conjunctions can also be seen as a sacred marriage. And a conjunction is a fusion of archetypal energies. So that means anything. You got the sun hanging out in Virgo, and alongside is Uranus for the ride. Okay? That's sacred marriage. And it's an intensity of planetary unions, and if an outer planet is there or a malefic is there, it's going to be a very different conversation. Okay? There's going to be, a lot more in that conversation, a lot more friction in that conversation, a little bit more upset in that conversation. So if Mars is alongside the sun for the ride, archetypally, that energy is, Mars is typified by a circle with an arrow. And that means out there. It's pointing up, it's pointing out. I'm going that way, I'm doing that thing, and bye. And if the sun's there, that consciousness, that sense of self is going to be motivated to do things. And if you have Saturn hanging out there, it's going to be motivated to build something, to master something, to have an objective and to steadily work towards that objective. That's a very different energy than, say, if you put Venus or Jupiter there. That is a gentler energy. Venus wants to harmonize, and Jupiter likes to expand. So all of the experiences with the Sun and Venus will be about how to harmonize, how to become tactful, diplomatic, how to build bridges of peace between people, build bridges of inclusivity between people, receptivity. Whereas Jupiter wants to expand things. It's like, okay, I'm here to expand people's minds, or their hearts, or their spirits, or their souls. Note the use of spiritual and transpersonal words here, because I'm in the middle of a shift, a paradigm shift within myself and within my own spiritual and astrology practice, of which astrology happens to be a part of. And so, having said that, we're looking at Jupiter expanding. It wants to expand upon things. Yes, I believe this, but I want to expand. Maybe I want to expand upon this, or maybe I want to expand beyond it, which is more than likely. And here's why. Because Jupiter, it has a affinity with Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is literally an arrow, pointing up, pointing anywhere. I want that, toward that, kind of like Mars energy in a way. They both have arrows attached. Archetypally, meaning that energy is going out. It's not pointing in, it's pointing out there toward experience. I'm motivated to expand beyond whatever this is to that. That is Jupiter energy. And so a conjunction between Mars and Saturn, which are called the malefics according to traditional astrology, is going to be a much more challenging aspect than, say, maybe if it were in Venus and Jupiter. However, this can change depending on the signs and the houses that these planets happen to actually be in. And so the current sky, let's see, we had the Sun and Mercury Kazumi. And Kazumi means that it's in the heart of. And about 0 degrees 17 minutes, anything within that period of time, we like it to be tight, is in the heart of. And also recently, Sun and Jupiter were Kazumi. And when Sun and Mercury are Kazumi, it is new ideas. That urge to be inquisitive. That means I'm curious and I want to experiment and explore. Let me go. And when it's Jupiter, I definitely want to explore. I have ideas. I want to explore emotionally, because it was in Cancer that Jupiter and the Sun were Kazumi. And that means more emotional intelligence, but it also can be mean that you're going to get that emotional intelligence, but it's not always going to be comfortable. It is through friction, it is through challenge that we learn. Not all the time, not all lessons happen through all experiences. All experiences do not provide lessons, because all experiences providing lessons means that no experiences provide lessons. So we have to be discerning about which ones are going to provide lessons, because we're the interpreter. We're the ones doing the interpretation. We're the ones trying to sort things out. So when the Sun and Jupiter were Kazumi, that is a supercharged conjunction, it means good fortune. And it is being intuitive, it is being emotionally intelligent on the upside, and it can be a bit moody, which not a problem. I don't see moody as a problem. I see moody as I need self-care. All emotions are feedback. So moodiness, and there could be excessive emotion, because Jupiter makes things bigger, also could be excessive emotion due to stressors, because there's a lot going on in our world today. And at that time, it just says, hey, you need to take a step back. Take care of yourself. Rest. Take some self-care. You're a person too. You deserve it as well. And so that would be how I would interpret those conjunctions via our transits. And so to work consciously with conjunctions in the chart is to, as I said, it's a sacred marriage or it's a mind meld. And to be aware that those energies move together. So if the Sun and Mercury are conjunct, Mercury and the Sun move as one unit. You see them as one unit. They are two parts of one unit. So you want to see it as a coin with a yes and a no side? Do so. But that is how that is. Sun, Jupiter, the same thing. All conjunctions, you're dealing with 2 or 3 or 4 sides of one unit. These planetary energies work together, which means if the Sun is working, Mercury is working. If the Sun is working, Jupiter is working, or Saturn, etc. And it requires a little bit of energy and awareness. Conjunctions need awareness. Otherwise, they're going to operate behind the veil of your inner world, and you're going to wonder what the hell is going on. Why am I doing this? It doesn't hurt to ask questions. So if you have questions you want to journal based on what's conjunct in your chart, feel free to ask questions. I mean, if you see Sun and Saturn in your chart, okay, what does that mean? Sun about the self, Saturn is about building and mastery. Where have I seen this in my life? What instances in my past did I notice this type of energy at play, for example? And that could be anything. If you got Mercury, how are you communicating? You got Jupiter, how do you want to expand, or how have you expanded? If you've got Saturn, it's also how have you constricted and gotten smaller? If it's Pluto, if it's Uranus, or Pluto, or Neptune, Uranus, what awakenings and revelations and insights have I had? And what shocks, what unexpected events did I experience? What dissolved if it's Neptune? What did I have to surrender? When it's Pluto, what did I let go of? What do I have to release? If it's, so here you are. If it's Venus, a need to harmonize. What do I value? And if it's Venus talking to Jupiter, what matters most to me. And so asking questions of your conjunction planets is useful. It's always useful to ask them of absolutely any planetary connections. As a matter of fact, if you don't have a journal, you should have one so you can write down your insights, because they are going to change. The whole point of writing it down and asking questions is because it is always going to change. And now you want to know. You'll have a record, as accurate as you can make it, record of your progress that you can see with your eyes. So you don't have to go outside and ask people unless these people are trustworthy people and you trust that they have your best interests at heart. It should always start inside first and go outside. It shouldn't be outside and then in. It should be inside out always. That's how I see it. So when we're looking at the next one is squares and oppositions, we've got creative tension, which I think is a really good way to describe that energy. And square is the crossroads of expansion, of growth, of learning. Oppositions are a mirror of awareness, but also choice. And so you have to find wisdom and challenge. Like, say, for example, you have Mars square Saturn, motivating, taking action, being assertive, also aggressive. Saturn's like, you need to temper that energy. So what happens is Mars is explosive, point outward, I'm going that way energy. And Saturn's like, whoa. Where are you going specifically? Because I can help you get there. We need to temper your enthusiasm. It's wonderful. It's great. Thank you. But we need to temper that enthusiasm with a plan, because this is how we're going to get to that. Because outcomes cannot be controlled. And Saturn energy in your chart is that maturing, that grounding energy that reminds you that you cannot control an outcome, but you can control the objectives leading to that outcome. So you've decided, for example, that you want to start making new friends. You haven't been socializing as much as you would like, for example. And that Mars energy is like, let's just go out and go dancing and drinking. Well, here's the problem with that. You have a full-time job and you are no longer 24. Which means you haven't done that in a while. Why? Because your body doesn't do that anymore. That's not a thing you do. You are a to-bed at 10 o'clock, 10:30 at the latest, maybe 11 if you're reading, but you're not that person that goes out dancing and stays out to 2 o'clock. The last time you did that, you fell asleep everywhere. You see, I'm telling you a story now. You fell asleep everywhere. So, you want to keep your job because you got bills to pay, and you don't want to lose that job because you don't want to spend time looking for one. So how can I find friends as I am now? Not that 25-year-old, that exuberant 24, 25-year-old I once was, but now. What can I do? Am I into apps? That sort of thing. And so Saturn's like, we're not that person anymore. We have to do it like we would do it now. And if we just run out there, we're going to burn ourselves out. We're going to get tired, and we might actually do more damage than we intended. And so sadly, Saturn gets a bad rap for being the conscientious friend who points out that this is probably not the best course of action. Let's try something else. Okay? So the evolutionary purpose of tension is development. And by development, I mean that a greater awareness and understanding. Let me rephrase that. A greater awareness and comprehension. And here's why I changed the word. Understanding is cognitive. It means you get the idea mentally. Comprehension comes from a word, the Latin word, I believe, which means to grasp. To grasp is also to know it internally, which means your mind knows it, but your feelings know it too. And that is what we are looking for. When we say development, that's what I mean. Now we're going to look at trines and sextiles, and that we would call flowing grace. And trine is the river of natural talent. That's the strengths. Those are the resources we come into the world with or acquire as we're in the world. And the sextile is a doorway of opportunity or possibility. That would be the key word. You can use possibility or opportunity as the key word or for the archetypal energy of a sextile. And so harnessing our innate talents and gifts through harmonious aspects. And that is also our comfort zone. Trines are a comfort zone. Those are the strengths that come to us naturally, that they feel easeful. For example, if you have the Sun and Venus in a trine with one another, and let's just keep it in water to keep this simple, there is a natural desire, a leaning toward emotional intelligence, harmonizing, meaning that if someone's distraught, upset, there is a tendency to want to meet them on the emotional plane. How are you doing? Are you okay? You feeling okay? You're providing them with a wise shoulder to cry on, and maybe just a kind and sensitive ear. And if it's a sextile, there is a possibility to grow. So it's talking about emotional intelligence. When we're talking about water signs, planets and water signs, we're talking about different levels of emotional intelligence and emotional awareness. And so a sextile is about becoming more emotionally aware than we would have been. And if it's in your natal chart, it's an ongoing experience. If you experience it via progression, it is for a season. If you do it for a transit, it is also for a shorter period of time. That part of your chart's being awakened. It's giving you an opportunity to become more emotionally intelligent, and the house it appears in and the aspects, other aspects it might be making. Besides that, sextile will give you a greater indication of how that emotional intelligence is going to, how comfortable it will feel, how much learning will be involved. Sometimes it'll be supportive and gentle, like a trine. Sometimes a little bit more with it, because a sextile is kind of has more than a trine, because you have to work a little bit harder for it than you would with a trine. It's not something that comes easy to you. It's fun, but not necessarily easy. And as we harness those gifts to these harmonious aspects, we also have to deal with the shadow side of easy aspects. And for a trine, that would be the complacency and taking things for granted. And for a sextile, it will be relapsing. So when making habits, when making changes, it's wise to understand, it's something I'm coming to right now myself, that you're going to relapse. Count on it. Account for it. Be okay with it. It's going to happen. You're going to start, and then you're going to stop and go, oh, as a client once said to me recently, oh, pooh, why isn't this thing that I want happening the way I want it to happen? Sort of thing. Sextiles come with that energy. You're going to make the effort, and you're going to drop off. And you're going, oh, God, I'm going to have to fix that again. And you try again, and you relapse. And you keep trying, and you relapse. So understanding that a sextile, there's going to be relapses, makes it easier to take. It's not a personal thing. You are not a failure because you relapsed. You're a human being, and you made the effort. Relapse is part of making that effort. You just make a note, okay, this is how it didn't work out this time. Now you have one of the many ways in which going after this, establishing this habit, going after this goal, many ways in which it did not work, because knowing how things don't work, what doesn't work, provides greater clarity for what does. That's the sextile energy. Now, aspect patterns, we can call it a cosmic mandala. Grand trines, T-squares, yards, things like that. So let me explain those briefly so as not, because I'm thinking I might want to do a longer conversation on this. A grand trine is a superpowered trine. It includes 3 or more planets, and it is supportive. I got this. It can happen by mode, meaning it's a cardinal trine. It could be a mutable trine. It could be a fixed trine. It could also be a fire, water, earth, and air trine, which will give you the idea of, the easeful energy of that, how to use that energy. T-squares are a little bit unstable and uncomfortable because they're supposed to be not like a T-square, but more like how do they call that? Like an X. It's like a rectangle with an X in the middle, and I can't remember what that's bloody well called today because my brain has been doing brain frog all week. However, T-squares are dynamic. There are two planets in opposition, and both those planets square a third planet. What's missing is an opposing planet to that third planet that both these opposing planets square. So let's say we have Uranus in a T-square with the Moon and Mars. Mars and the Moon are in opposition, and they both form a square to Uranus. Uranus is the focal point of that T-square, which means that all of the steam, if you might consider it like a teapot steaming, and there's that spigot on a teapot that releases the steam so that it doesn't stay inside and cause an explosion, because heated pressure will affect metal, wood, anything, and so that spigot there is to stave off some of that steam. That is what Uranus does for this T-square. It is unstable because the opposing point, let's say Venus in Taurus. Let's put Venus there in Taurus, but it doesn't matter. Let's just stick Venus there. Venus in the opposing point to Uranus makes a more stable mystical rectangle, is what I'll call it. And now it's more stable, and the energy is free flow, but T-squares are very dynamic. It is, with that square, I'm motivated to, and I feel safe when I am innovating, when I am having breakthroughs, when I am in motion, answering to whatever is coming up in the moment, meaning there's sudden, constant change. Something is always happening, and I am always having to respond to that. That is the energy of Uranus, Moon, and Mars in a T-square. Okay? Yods are when two planets are quincunx, and then there is a sextile, I believe, at the bottom of that. And that provides stability in a chart, because the yod is called a finger of fate. And they are, like quincunx energy is buttressing energy. So let's just say that we got Uranus at the focal point and sextile the Moon and Mars. Those two, that energy is an opportunity. It's a possibility. You still got to work it, but it's not entirely comfortable, because that Uranus energy is never ever going to play nice with these two energies here, which are learning to play nice. So it's kind of unstable, but not necessarily a bad thing, because you're learning to make adjustments. You know, I want to innovate, but we're going to have to adjust, because this is not we don't have it like a trine, where it's comfortable and we know how to do it naturally. It's constant effort and relapse, and having to constantly explore and experiment and take notes of what works and does not work, pointing toward that Uranus energy. That means constantly going to have to adjust how to invent, how to respond, how to react, etc. And lastly, let me have one more look at my notes. Those are the major ones I see, but that I tend to see in a chart. There are tons of others, which reminds me that I'm going to have a episode that talks about this in the near future. So, multiple aspects create integrated life themes. So basically, when you're looking at a grand trine, you're looking at a life theme. When you're looking at a T-square or a yod, you're looking at a life theme. Life themes are also archetypal. So T-squares are all about creative ferment. Grand trines are all about supportive energy. It's nurturing and supportive, like motherly type energy. Whereas a yod is very much about learning to adjust, to be a troubleshooter. Okay, this didn't work. Let's try something else, kind of thing. That's that energy. So you recognize these patterns and you see them in your own chart. You can start working with them consciously, by making sense of it in your own way. As I said, ask questions. What does this mean in my life? What experiences have I had for this yard, this grand trine, this T-square? What life experiences have I noticed that line up with this? If this T-square were a person, a thing, an animal, what would it be like? If it were a character, what would it be like? And based on its house placements of all the planets, what does that environment look like? The whole point is to be able to tell a story about it, because stories make it easy for your brain to remember it. And if you can personalize it by telling a story that you made up, you generated, you created, it makes it more personal for you and easier for you to interact with it, because you're not trying to make it easy for other people to interact. You want to understand. You want to comprehend you so that you can live life on your terms as authentically as possible. Now, the wise thing for us to do would be to map out one key aspect in your chart at a time. Okay? So what we're going to do, what my suggestion would be to do, is to find like a conjunction. Look at the square. Find one that turns you on. Is there a planet that you like? Get into it. Step into it. What aspects are happening? With what planets? What are your favorite planets? Start there. It's just easier if you start with something you like than going after something you hate. So if you're a real big fan of Venus, what's Venus doing? Who's Venus hanging out with? Who's she talking to? Who are they talking to? Sorry about that. Who are they talking to? Step into that aspect. Is it talking to the moon and you're really fascinated by the moon? Lean into it. Ask questions. Build a world. Create characters and interact with those characters. Engage with them. Get yourself a journal. Ask questions. That's the best way to understand these aspects, because in understanding them, you are comprehending you. And the next episode is going to be on houses as archetypal environments. And a little bit of reflection. Becoming fluent in the language of aspects is becoming fluent in the language of you. To understand your inner world much better is to allow you to understand you better, so you can live authentically on your own terms and show up in the world in ways that you want to show up in the world. Okay? So, I appreciate you all for listening. Thank you for allowing me to talk about this thing that fascinates the hell out of me. And may we all see the sacred geometry connecting us to each other and the cosmos. Peace and astro magic, star people.